Our story begins on the open waters of the Indian Ocean. A lone wooden boat creaks as it drifts across the waves, its sails tugged by a restless wind. The horizon glows faintly with the last remnants of sunset, while shadows stretch across the sea. Ahead lies an island, dark, isolated, and forbidden. This is North Sentinel Island, one of the last places on Earth untouched by the modern world. For centuries, it has remained shrouded in secrecy, protected not only by the coral reefs and dangerous currents that surround it, but also by the fierce resistance of the Sentinelese people, a community that has lived there, undisturbed, for tens of thousands of years. Few outsiders have ever seen the island. Even fewer have survived attempts to make contact. And yet, in 2018, one man made the choice to step ashore, believing he could bridge a divide that no one before him had crossed. His name was John Allen Chau, visual cut, old maps, parchment drawings. Grainy footage of sees John was born into a world far removed from this forbidden place. Raised in the United States, he grew up with a love of adventure, stories of exploration, and a deep commitment to his faith. He spent years training, studying, and preparing, convinced that his purpose in life was to reach those who had never heard his message. But his calling was unlike most. John wanted to bring Christianity to one of the most isolated groups on the planet. For anthropologists and historians, North Sentinel has long been a mystery. The Sentinelese are thought to be direct descendants of the first humans, who migrated out of Africa nearly 60,000 years ago, while the rest of the world transformed through agriculture, technology, and globalization. The people of this island lived apart, refusing all contact. Every attempt to approach them was met with hostility. Outsiders who strayed too close were greeted not with handshakes, but with arrows. The message was always clear. "You are not welcome here," narrator slower, serious tone. But John believed he was different. He believed he was called to bring the light of his faith into the untouched darkness. So he set out on his journey. On a quiet November night, under a sky scattered with stars, John convinced local fishermen to take him close to the forbidden island. The men were reluctant. They knew the dangers, the warnings, the laws that forbade contact. India had officially banned outsiders from approaching the island, both to protect the Sentinelese way of life and to prevent deadly disease from being introduced to them. But John was persistent. He saw the risk as a test of faith. At the edge of the reef, the fishermen refused to go any closer. From here, John was on his own. He lowered a small canoe into the waves, carrying with him a Bible, food, medical supplies, and small gifts for the islanders. He paddled slowly, the water dark and endless around him, the sound of his strokes echoing in the night. Ahead, the island loomed, a jagged outline of dense forest, fringed with pale beaches that gleamed in the moonlight. And somewhere in the shadows, the Sentinelese were watching. It's visual cut. Recreations of island shoreline, palm trees swaying, eerie silence for John. This was the culmination of years of preparation. He had studied linguistics, practiced survival skills, and even trained in medical care. He believed he was ready. But no preparation could have erased the truth. The Sentinelese did not want him there. As he drew closer, he saw them. Dark figures, standing still at the edge of the forest. Silent, watching. John called out, his voice carried by the wind. "Oh." There was no reply. Only the crash of the surf, the rustle of leaves, and the distant crack of branches. For a moment, time seemed suspended. An ancient people, face to face with a man from the modern world, one of the last untouched frontiers colliding with the 21st century, and then movement. The figures disappeared into the forest. The beach was empty again, narrator somber, reflective. John believed this was a sign, test, perhaps even an opening. He returned to the fishermen, filled with determination to try again. But the island had made itself clear. For the Sentinelese, every stranger is a threat. Their history has taught them this. In the late 1800s, a British colonial officer named Maurice Vidal Portman led an expedition to North Sentinel. He kidnapped 6 islanders, an elderly couple, and 4 children, and brought them to the mainland. Within days, the adults grew ill and died from exposure to diseases their immune systems had never known. Horrified, Portman returned the children to the island. but the damage was done. From that moment on, the Sentinelese hostility toward outsiders only hardened. To them, John was not a missionary. He was a stranger, a danger, a reminder of death. Narrator calm but chilling. And yet, John pressed forward, he wrote in his journal, describing the moments before he stepped back onto the Forbidden Island. He called it Satan's last stronghold. He prayed for courage, even as he admitted he was afraid. He knew death was a possibility. But he believed the mission was worth it. The next time he paddled ashore, he carried more gifts: fish, scissors, a football. He tried to speak, shouting words he hoped would be understood. The islanders emerged once more from the trees. They did not respond with words. Instead, an arrow was loosed. It struck the Bible John held in his hand. Narrator soft, slow. This was the island's answer, and John, undeterred, returned yet again. It would be his last attempt. November 2018, the Bay of Bengal. The waters surrounding North Sentinel Island churned with their usual intensity, reefs breaking the surf into froth, waves pounding against the coral barriers that had kept this island sealed away for millennia. Somewhere beyond those reefs, John Allen Chau sat in his canoe, the shoreline drawing closer with each paddle stroke. The dense forest of North Sentinel rose before him, its trees swaying with the coastal winds. It was a landscape few had ever seen up close, a wilderness that had never been tamed by agriculture, cities, or roads. It was a land where outsiders were not welcome. Visual cut archival photos of anthropological expeditions, maps of the Andaman Islands narrator measured, informative. North Sentinel Island lies within India's Andaman and Nicobar archipelago, scattered chain of islands deep in the Indian Ocean. While most of the region has been touched by colonialism, Earth trade, and modern development, North Sentinel has remained locked in time. The Indian government has officially declared it off limits. 3-mile exclusion zone surrounds the island, with patrols ensuring no vessel comes too close. The ban serves two purposes: to protect the Sentinelese from outside diseases, and to protect outsiders from the Sentinelese. The hostility of the islanders is not random aggression, it is survival. For tens of thousands of years, the Sentinelese have lived in near total isolation. Their immune systems are unprepared for contact. Even a simple cold could devastate their entire population. And so, the law is clear. No contact, no approach. No intrusion. But John Chau believed his mission was worth breaking that law. Narrator somber, reflective. Before his final attempt, John wrote in his diary. His words reveal a man torn between fear and faith. He confessed his terror at the possibility of death. And yet, he described his calling to reach the Sentinelese as an ordained mission. He wrote, "This is Satan's last stronghold." In his mind, this was more than an island. It was a spiritual battlefield. Visual cut. Reenactment. A man sitting alone by lantern light. Writing in a notebook, narrator steady, neutral. The night before his final landing, John left behind a note for his family and friends. In it, he expressed his wish that no one recovered his body if he were killed. He asked for forgiveness for what he was about to do. He knew the risks, but he went anyway. On the morning of November 17, 2018, John Chau paddled once more toward the Forbidden Island. Fishermen who had brought him near the reef waited at a distance, unwilling to watch what might happen. From their vantage point, they saw him disappear toward the tree line. What followed can only be pieced together from their testimony. As John approached, the Sentinelese emerged from the forest. They were armed with bows and arrows, their stance defensive, their message unmistakable: leave. John attempted to communicate. He shouted words, gestures, offers of gifts. But the islanders did not answer, and then they raised their weapons. Moments later, arrows flew. John was struck, staggered, but continued forward. The fishermen watched in horror as the islanders surrounded him. The confrontation was brief, decisive, and final. By the end of the encounter, John lay still on the sand. His body was dragged into the trees, never to be seen again. Visual cut. Slow pan of stormy ocean waves. Empty canoe floating on surf, narrator somber. John Allen Chau was 26 years old. His death shocked the world, sparking outrage, debate, and reflection. To some, he was a martyr, a man who sacrificed his life for his faith. To others, he was reckless, an adventurer who ignored the warnings of law, history, and anthropology. But whatever one's view, his death reopened an old question. What does it mean when the modern world collides with an isolated one? Narrator informative. This was not the first time outsiders had met violence on North Sentinel. In 2006, two fishermen illegally approached the island while harvesting crabs. Their boat drifted too close, and the Sentinelese attacked, killing both men. When Indian authorities attempted to recover the bodies by helicopter, the islanders shot arrows at the aircraft, forcing it to retreat. Their message was consistent. They wanted no contact. And yet, John believed he could break through where others had failed. Visual cut archival photos of Maurice Vidal Portman's expedition narrator measured historical. The hostility of the Sentinelese is rooted in history. The British colonial officer, Maurice Vidal Portman, led an expedition to the island. His team captured 6 Sentinelese, an elderly couple and 4 children, and brought them to Port Blair, the colonial capital. Within days, the elderly captives grew gravely ill. They soon died, victims of diseases their bodies had never encountered. Portman, realizing his mistake, returned the children to their home. But the damage was permanent. From that moment on, the Sentinelese treated every outsider as a threat. What happened in the 1800s explains their hostility today. To them, strangers mean death, narratorreflective.com. And so John Chau's mission was never only about faith. It was about a collision of worlds, a people determined to remain untouched, and a man determined to reach them, no matter the cost. His journals reveal a man aware of the danger, but unwilling to turn back. He described the islanders' arrows, their shouts, their rejection. He admitted to fear. But he pressed forward, convinced that his death would not be in vain. To his supporters, this was devotion. To his critics, it was arrogance. It's a visual cut, overhead drone footage of thick forests, crashing waves. Narrator serious, steady. Today, North Sentinel remains closed. The Indian government has reinforced its exclusion zone, ensuring no one may approach. The Sentinelese continue to live as they have for thousands of years, hunting, gathering, fishing, and thriving in isolation. And John Allen Chau's body has never been recovered. The story of John's death is not only about one man, but about the limits of human contact, the clash between conviction and respect, and the question of whether some places are meant to remain untouched. North Sentinel Island is still forbidden. The death of John Allen Chau in 2018 did not happen in isolation. It was the climax of a centuries-long tension between modern civilization and one of the world. Those last truly uncontacted tribes. To understand why his journey ended in tragedy, we must step back into the wider history of the Andaman Islands, into the anthropology of isolated peoples, and into the ethics that still divide experts today. Visual, cut aerial view of the Andaman archipelago, lush forests. Turquoise seas narrator informative. The Andaman Islands stretch across the eastern Indian Ocean. Closer to Myanmar and Thailand than to mainland India, for thousands of years they were home to a mosaic of indigenous groups, each with distinct cultures, languages, and traditions. These peoples, the Great Andamanese, the Anj, the Jarwa, the Champans, and the Sentinelese, are believed to be among the oldest continuous populations on Earth, direct descendants of humanity's earliest migrations out of Africa. For much of history, their isolation protected them, but the arrival of colonial powers changed everything. Visual cut. Black and white engravings of British colonial officers in the 19th century. When the British established control over the Andaman Islands in the 1800s, they saw the region not as a cultural sanctuary, but as a strategic outpost. The islands became the site of a notorious penal colony, the cellular jail, or Kalapani, where rebels and prisoners were sent in harsh conditions. Colonial officers also attempted to study, and often control, the indigenous tribes. Their approach was a mixture of fascination, exploitation, and misunderstanding. Expeditions led by figures like Maurice Vidal Portman treated the tribes as subjects of curiosity, photographing them, capturing them, and in some cases parading them before colonial audiences. The result was devastating. With no immunity to diseases like measles, influenza, and smallpox, entire communities collapsed. Populations that once numbered in the thousands dwindled to mere hundreds. Some, like the great Andamanese, were almost wiped out. By the early 20th century, many anthropologists warned that contact was quite literally deadly, narrator somber. But the Sentinelese were different. Unlike their neighbors, they resisted every attempt at contact with unwavering hostility. Their arrows and spears were not signs of aggression, but of defense. They had seen what happened to other tribes. They knew what outsiders brought: disease, violence, death. So they remained apart, retreating deeper into their forests, defending their shores with precision and silence. In time, even the British gave up on North Sentinel. The island became a place of mystery, untouched, uncolonized, and unexplored. Visual cut. Footage of Indian anthropologists in the 1970s. Cautiously leaving coconuts on a beach, narrator steady. Informative. After India gained independence in 1947, the Andaman Islands came under Indian administration. For decades, officials and anthropologists attempted contact expeditions to North Sentinel, usually by leaving gifts along the shore. Coconuts, bananas, and pots were offered. At times, the Sentinelese would approach cautiously, even accept the items. But more often than not, they responded with hostility, firing arrows, brandishing spears, or vanishing back into the trees. By the 1990s, Indian authorities realized these missions were dangerous and unnecessary. They ended official attempts at contact and declared North Sentinel off-limits. The Sentinelese, it was decided, had made their wishes clear. They wanted to be left alone, narrator reflective. It was into this context that John Allen Chau stepped. When news of his death spread, it ignited fierce debate across the globe. Supporters saw him as a man of conviction, willing to risk his life to share his faith. His mission was compared to those of early Christian martyrs who brought their message to hostile lands despite persecution and death. Critics, however, saw recklessness. They argued that Chau ignored not only the laws of India, but the lessons of history. His arrival risked introducing disease to the Sentinelese, a population so vulnerable that even one infection could cause catastrophe. To many anthropologists, his journey was not bravery, but endangerment. Visual cut. Interview clips of anthropologists, historians, and ethicists. Narrator measured, serious. The question at the heart of the debate is simple. Should the Sentinelese be contacted? On one side are those who argue that isolation condemns the Sentinelese to a limited existence, cut off from medicine, education, and the benefits of modern life. They see contact as inevitable and believe it should be carefully managed. On the other side are those who insist that the Sentinelese have made their position clear. They do not want outsiders, do not want contact. To respect their autonomy means leaving them alone. The Indian government has chosen the latter. North Sentinel remains protected by law, sealed away from the outside world. But Chau's death reopened the argument. Narrator soft, somber. In his final journals, John wrote of his longing to reach the Sentinelese, even if it meant his death. He described their arrows piercing his Bible, his prayers whispered into the waves, his fear and his faith. He seemed to know the end was near. Lord, is this island Satan's last stronghold? Should I not be here? He wrote, for him the mission was worth the risk. For the Sentinelese, his presence was a threat. The collision was inevitable. It's visual cut. Closing with slow aerial footage of North Sentinel, waves breaking against the reef, narrator serious, reflective. Today, North Sentinel remains what it has always been, a world apart. Its people continue to live as hunter-gatherers, fishing in the shallow reefs, hunting in the forest, and building homes from wood and leaves. Their language remains unstudied, their culture unrecorded. They are a reminder of humanity's earliest way of life, preserved against the tide of history. For now, they remain untouched. But John Allen Chau's story lingers, a reminder of the dangers of crossing boundaries, of the questions that remain about isolation, faith, and the limits of human contact. John Allen Chau's death on the shores of North Sentinel was not just a personal tragedy. It was a moment that reignited global discussion about a much larger issue: the survival of the world's uncontacted tribes. The Sentinelese are not alone. Across the globe, in remote forests, mountains, and river valleys, dozens of communities continue to live without sustained contact with the modern world. Each one faces the same dilemma: how long can isolation last? And should it? Visual cut. Aerial shots of the Amazon rainforest, thick green canopy stretching endlessly. The largest number of uncontacted peoples live in the Amazon basin. Brazil and Peru in particular are home to dozens of groups who remain apart from wider society, hidden in dense rainforests that outsiders rarely penetrate. These tribes are often referred to as voluntarily isolated peoples. Like the Sentinelese, their separation is not simply a matter of geography but of choice. When threatened by disease, violence, or exploitation in the past, many retreated deeper into the forest, rejecting further contact. For example, the Mashkapiro of Peru are known to appear sporadically along riverbanks, sometimes making gestures toward outsiders, sometimes brandishing weapons to warn them away. Similarly, in Brazil, the so-called fleckeros, or arrow people, have been glimpsed only at a distance, firing arrows at intruding loggers or researchers. Their message echoes that of the Sentinelese: stay away. Narrator somber, reflective. The dangers they face are not imaginary. History has shown that contact with the outside world often leads to devastation. In the Amazon, epidemics brought by missionaries, rubber barons, and loggers decimated indigenous populations. Entire cultures collapsed within a generation. The same pattern has repeated worldwide, in North America, in Australia, in the Pacific Islands. Disease traveled faster than ships. For communities without immunity, even a single visitor could change everything. And so, when uncontacted tribes meet outsiders with hostility, it is not savagery. It is survival. Visual cut. Archival photos of first contact moments, contrasted with modern drone footage of tribes. Narrator informative, steady. Anthropologists describe first contact as one of the most delicate and dangerous moments a community can face. The risk of violence is high. Misunderstandings are inevitable. And disease is the greatest threat of all. This is why most governments and indigenous organizations now promote what is known as the no-contact policy. It is a principle that respects the right of uncontacted peoples to remain isolated if they choose, shielding them from outside intrusion. In Brazil, entire areas of the Amazon have been designated as protected territories, off limits to logging, mining, and settlement. Patrols monitor the borders not to invite contact, but to keep intruders out. India has taken a similar stance with North Sentinel, establishing a 3-mile exclusion zone and criminalizing any attempt to approach. The reasoning is simple. The safest contact is no contact at all. Narrator serious, thought-provoking. And yet, debates continue. Some argue that permanent isolation is impossible in a world of expanding technology, deforestation, and climate change. They believe it is only a matter of time before outsiders reach even the most remote communities, whether intentionally or not. Others point out that isolation protects culture, identity, and autonomy. Forcing contact, they argue, strips away centuries of tradition and replaces them with dependence, poverty, and loss. At the heart of this debate lies a philosophical question. Do uncontacted peoples have the right to say no to the rest of humanity? For the Sentinelese, that answer has been given, clearly and repeatedly. Visual cut. Drone footage circling the dense canopy of North Sentinel, never crossing into its heart. NarratorReflective.com. The Sentinelese are estimated to number anywhere between 50 and 150 people. Their language is unknown, their customs undocumented. They live by hunting, gathering, and fishing along the shallow reefs. Every glimpse of their lives has been from a distance. Figures moving in the trees, fires burning at night, arrows shot toward intruders. And yet, in their isolation, they embody a living window into humanity's past, a way of life untouched by agriculture, industry, or technology. For some, this inspires awe. For others, frustration. Narrator steady, factual. The tragedy of John Allen Chau became a symbol of this clash. Supporters of his mission insisted that he acted out of selfless conviction, bringing his faith to those who had never heard it. They point to Christian tradition, where missionaries throughout history braved danger to spread their message. From St. Paul in the Roman world to missionaries in Africa and Asia. Critics countered that Chau's mission was not only reckless but dangerous to the very people he hoped to help. By entering North Sentinel illegally, he broke laws designed to protect the tribe. Worse, he risked bringing pathogens that could have wiped out their entire community. To many anthropologists, it was not an act of bravery, but of arrogance. The global reaction revealed just how divided opinion remains. In some circles, John was hailed as a martyr. In others, his actions were condemned as a cautionary tale of cultural imperialism. The Sentinelese, meanwhile, offered no opinion. They remained silent, as they always had, their arrows and silence speaking for them. To this day, their world continues, unchanged, untouched. While ours debates what should or should not be done. Narrator soft, lingering. In the end, perhaps the most striking truth is this. The Sentinelese do not need us, but we seem unable to stop needing them, needing their story, their image, their mystery. Their very existence challenges our assumptions about progress, modernity, and the universality of human contact. North Sentinel Island stands as a reminder that even in the 21st century, there are boundaries that cannot, and perhaps should not, be crossed. North Sentinel remains what it has always been, untouched, unyielding, and unapproachable. The Sentinelese continue their lives beyond the tree line, unseen by the outside world. We know almost nothing about their language, their stories, their rituals, and perhaps that is how it must remain. But John Allen Chau's death ensures one thing. The Forbidden Island will never be forgotten. It has become a symbol of faith and recklessness, of mystery and defiance, of the last frontier where modern humanity is not welcome, and the questions linger. Should such places be left in silence forever? Or is it only a matter of time before curiosity, faith, or ambition forces the next confrontation? Narrator pause, softer, reflective. The island has spoken clearly, stay away. But will the world listen? In every age, there are places we are told we must never go. History shows us. Someone always tries. The only question is, what happens when they do?